Hello and welcome to Literacy Waggle, and this week we're going to be focusing on lesson Cogs. Lesson Cogs is a really good way of showing and demonstrating to teachers how lessons are put together with different types of activities. Every activity in a lesson should have a purpose, whether it's to engage a child, to allow a child to discover something new, or allow a child to apply their knowledge. There's lots of different activities that have the similar purpose. However, more often than not, we find teachers spending far too long on certain activities and not enough time on others. So therefore, what we want to do as Literacy Waggle is break down those activities and look at exactly what the purpose of each activity in a lesson is, how long should it last, and ask the question, is what we are doing purposeful? So let me introduce to you the lesson Cogs. Now, as we go through each activity type, which is represented by one cog, we're going to recommend what length of time each activity should last for. Now, this is a recommendation. It's always important that as a teacher, you think about the activity and think about how long this activity should last for it to be purposeful. If the activity lasts too long, then the activity starts to become less purposeful. And equally, if an activity is too short, then it can also lose its purposefulness. So yes, we're going to give you a recommendation for how long these activities should last, but as a teacher, you should also consider this when planning your lessons. Okay, the first cog is the engagement type activities. These activities are all to do with inspiring the children, getting them hooked into a lesson, getting them invigorated, getting their brain working. Sometimes these can link to warm-ups or hooks. The idea of these activities is just to get the children engaged with the topic or an idea. Therefore, they shouldn't really last too long because there's not always too much learning involved. It's more to do with getting the children active and engaged with a lesson. So we recommend maybe 3 to 5 minutes of engagement activities to really hook them into your lesson. Okay, the cog number 2 is the discover type activity. This is where children learn new information. In lessons, it's really important that obviously they discover something new because that's when the progress starts. And children start to discover something that they didn't know before, or learn something they couldn't do before, or build on something that they used to know something about but now know a little bit more on. So this is all about discovering something new. So these activities may last slightly longer, so it may last from in between 5, 10, 15 minutes, perhaps even 20 minutes. What's really important is this is the point where learning starts. Okay, cog number 3 is the practice cog. So this is all about the children practicing that skill. So in lessons, once a child has learnt something new or learnt a new skill or has built on something, they then get to practice it and rehearse it. There may be a bit of repetition in this, answering lots of questions, using their skill to rehearsing that to make sure they're not making any mistakes with the bare basics of what they have to do with that new piece of learning. These activities again can last maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes because it's important the child gets to rehearse those new skills and starts to use them. Lesson cog number 4 is apply. Application is absolutely key to allowing children to master a skill. Once a child has practiced it and they've rehearsed that skill and they're not making as many mistakes, they then should be asked to apply that skill to a real life setting or a problem or something that gives that learning a purpose. And so within that lesson, the children may spend another 10-15 minutes starting to apply that lesson. This cog should last roughly about maybe 10-15 minutes, but this does vary upon the type of lesson that you're delivering. And finally, cog number 5. Cog number 5 is all about reviewing. So children should also be given activities that allow them to evaluate and reflect on what they've learnt, what they can and can't do. Sometimes these happen at the end of a lesson, but sometimes they happen in the middle of lessons as well. Sometimes they're commonly known as mini plenaries or plenaries, but really all we're asking is children to review their learning. Have they learnt something new? If so, what? And what do we need to do next to improve even further? And it's really important that children get a chance in lessons and that activities are planned to allow them to do that. So those are the lesson cogs. But what we really want to do now is what they look like in lessons. So what we've done is formed 3 types of lessons that you might use these cogs within. So first of all, let me introduce you to the standard lesson. This standard lesson is kind of a one-off lesson that you might do for a topic-based lesson, or where you'll just want to introduce a skill that will be completed within 1 or 2 hours. So let's have a look. So here you can see that the first activity is an engagement activity. It's always great that as the children come into the lesson, they're engaged with something, a quick practical activity that allows them to get involved with whatever the topic may be. Once you've engaged them, you then introduce them to something new, which is where they discover. Now this should be an activity, not teacher talk. Again, the children should go off and discover something new, whether it be looking at a video to discover a new method or a new idea, looking at a picture to start to investigate it. Basically, the activity should focus on them discovering the new skill of a new piece of information that you want them to discover. This may last a little bit longer, it might be short, depending on the content of what you want them to grasp. Once they've discovered it, of course, it's time to practice. The next activity should be all about them practicing that new skill and that new knowledge. Then they should move on to the application, the children solving problems using that new skill, working together, working in teams, working independently, but solving real life problems. Makes the learning purposeful, but also gets them to start to master that skill, starting to be able to use it in lots of different ways. And finally, in a lesson like this, you would then review the lesson. What have they learnt? What have they found difficult? What have they now been successful in? And what might they need to do next to be even more successful in the future? So we call this the standard lesson. Lesson example number 2 is the new skill lesson. This is where you're introducing a completely new concept. So this child has never done anything like this before. So for example, it might be that in year 1 you're introducing the whole new concept of adding up. Or it might be that in year 3 you're introducing the idea of a column addition method. Something that they've never really done before. So it's really important that you're going to spend a lot more time practicing and discovering opposed to applying. The application will come in lessons at a later date. So here you can see in this example, we have an engagement again to hook the children in, a discovering activity where they discover the new method, a practice where they practice that new method, but then they review that situation, review how well they're getting on, and you may revert back to discovering again, discovering a new method or discovering a new strategy within that, and then move into practice again, a little bit for application just to touch upon it, to start them using that skill, but really that's going to be a really short activity towards the end to really push those children on. And then again, another review. So for children, it's much more about discovering something new and of course practicing that skill throughout that lesson. And finally, that brings us on to example number 3, which might be the next lesson, and what we like to call the mastery lesson. Now, the mastery lesson is obviously much less about children discovering something new and more about children applying their skills in different ways in real life settings on to really get to grips with a method or a new piece of learning. So you may start off a lesson not with engagement, with a quick practice to rehearse and recall all the different things that they've learnt about so far in this topic. And of course, then they move on to an engagement where the engagement is much more about linking it to a real life setting. So it might be a letter from a famous person asking for a problem to be solved, an investigation, whatever it might be. Again, the children engage with something and then they move on to applying that. They then review how that application's gone, and then they may be engaged with something different, a new type of activity that's going to allow them to apply something even further. And again, that then finishes with a review. So you can see how these lesson cogs can be used in lots of different ways and for different purposes, depending on what type of lesson you have planned. If it's something new, you're going to have to focus a lot more on practice and discovery. If it's a skill that they've been used to for quite a while, then you might go and look at an application style lesson or a mastery lesson as we've gone through. And so those are our Literacy Waggle lesson cogs. Now, I'm pretty sure that some people might think that there are more cogs, and that's absolutely okay. You may as a school adapt these and add extra cogs. You might remove cogs. But the idea is what it gets teachers to do is think about the purpose of every single activity within their lesson. If you can't categorise your activity into a cog or a learning opportunity, then the chances are that that activity isn't going to be purposeful for that child, and it will lose the direction and focus of what you're trying to get to. Please also remember that our recommended timings are just recommendations. Sometimes it's necessary to make an activity longer or shorter depending on how quickly the children get it. And of course there's always differentiation. When we're talking about children discovering, they don't all have to discover it in the same way. They don't have to all apply the skills in the same way. They may not even review their learning in the same way. Differentiation is always key, but what's really important is that all the activities, no matter what they are, have a direction and a purpose within the lessons. So I'm Ben Cooper from Literacy Waggle. Please check out our website, it's full of lots of literacy resources, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel where we have many more videos like this to push teaching and learning in the UK forward and give people free professional development opportunities. Have a really good day.